Welcome back to the Boardman Black and Gold podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers did not manage to be swept by the Cleveland Browns for the first time in this century, millennium, all of that. Thankfully, we came home with a 27-14 win. Pretty much like right where we were thinking this game was going to end up. We said that the offense was going to work a good bit, and the defense played very well as well, so this is a good win, David, and I think this was foreseen. I don't think this is too much of a surprise, but it is nice to be able to know that we could take care of business this week.
Absolutely, and I would agree. It was pretty predictable. I thought that, it was going to be tight kind of to start. They were going to hang on a little bit, but I thought that with our offense and, the way our defense played last week, I thought we were going to pull away with it. We ended up pulling away with it a lot quicker than I thought we were going to. And, yeah, it was a pleasing game. It was very nice in the eyes to watch. Just a classic Steelers home game against the Browns. We're dominating. It just was this is a nice week. Take a breath. Great week.
Yeah. And I think what you said about just how the game started, it was a little shaky, and I'll be honest, I was on a golf course watching the beginning of the game, and I was kind of wondering to myself, what's going on? We sputter out in the red zone, we settle for a field goal, we give up the long touchdown to Jerry Jeudy, and at that point you're thinking, uh-oh, here we go again, what's the deal? But then after that, it seemed like they really did settle down. It seemed like stuff kind of mellowed out a good bit, and they just kept their traction, and they stuck with it, and they ended up pulling away big time at the end there, to the point where I believe they were up 27-7 at one point. Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's right.
So a 20-point lead, at any point in any game is very good, and the fact that they ended up and won by 2 scores, I think, was also very encouraging, because you think about that Bengals game from 2 weeks ago when they had a 2-score lead and they kind of were letting up a good bit, and it was a little bit shaky there at the end to where it was a 1-score game at the very end. I'm glad that they kept the Browns where they were this week, that they didn't let them back in it at all, because I feel like, again, with Jameis Winston, if you give him that shot to come back in a game like this, he would have taken advantage of it. And this week, instead, the difference that we saw between this week and that Thursday night football game is we put the cleat on the throat and we didn't let him get back into it. So that was very encouraging this week.
Oh, absolutely. And that was a great point, because our defense, I think, had multiple stops to keep that 2-point lead. It wasn't just a one and done. Our offense did eventually take care of it, but our defense stopped it a few times. And the second touchdown the Browns scored was really just in garbage time. I don't really hold much weight to that second touchdown. And I think that, our defense, honestly didn't look bad even when the Browns scored. The secondary, again, I think that we're still running into the problems of if we're not getting pressure to the quarterback, people are going to get open, which is a pretty common thing. But after that drive, the Browns, they literally did nothing. I think the Keanu Benton interception was the turning point of the game of all right, we'll take the reins from here, and it was smooth sailing.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that play specifically, I want to highlight Beanie Bishop, because it's very easy to go in there and try to sell out for that sack, but instead Bishop had his hands up the entire time, just getting in the eye line of Jameis Winston, and it forced Winston to make an ill-advised throw, which made it easier for Benton to pick it off anyway. If that throw is any harder, if it's any firmer than it was, I don't know if Benton has the hands to be able to pick that off, but because of the pressure of Beanie Bishop having his hands up, making himself big, that allowed that interception to happen. So I think that was a twofold effort to have Beanie Bishop on the front end of that and then have Benton finishing off on the back end. So that was a textbook play, and a play that I'm very encouraged to see coming into a set of 4 weeks against really good quarterbacks. A couple of these weeks are against some very mobile quarterbacks too. We got Jalen Hurts and then Lamar Jackson here coming up very soon. To know that the Steelers can do that type of thing against a mobile quarterback is very important to me because I think against these mobile quarterbacks, if you sell out for those sacks, that's when they can get you in trouble because they can move with their feet, they can create, and to know that we can kind of stay home on those ones that we might be tempted to go after a sack, that just makes me even more confident coming into these next couple weeks.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, yeah, all this game really gave me was confidence. Especially we haven't talked about this, even the subtraction of George Pickens, which, if I'm being honest, I wasn't super upset about it. George Pickens, great player, but sometimes it's nice to not watch somebody who acts like a middle schooler on the field. And so it was just pleasing in some ways to not have that. But at first, I was a little worried. I was like, oh my, do we not have a deep threat here because of George Pickens? But then we found out what happens when you actually put Mike Williams in the game and then throw it to him. Good things happen. And, yeah, I think that I love the way our defense looked overall, and I think I like our defense against these other teams. I'm getting ahead of myself. But the run game, I'd say I was a little worried about watching. It seemed like there was a lot of holes for Chubb and Ford. There were some good plays. Watt had an awesome play. Mm-hmm. But I was just seeing a lot of 5 to 7 yard pickups with the Browns. And it's like, all right, we got Philly next week. They're the best running football team in the league. So we got to fix that. But overall, I am very content right now with this defense and this offense. And I'm loving the direction we're heading and just building that confidence.
Yeah, and I think we're continuing to see the evolution of the Russ to Freiermuth connection. We were kind of worried about that recently, or a couple weeks ago. We're like, where is Freiermuth? Why is he not involved in this offense? But now, in back-to-back weeks, we see 2 really nice touchdown passes from Russ to Freiermuth on kind of unconventional plays where Russ is kind of creating something that wasn't there originally, and then Freiermuth is making plays on the back end of that. So to know that is trending upwards is really, really good, and I think that's really important to add him, especially if George Pickens is perhaps going to be out. I was just watching the Mike Tomlin press conference here just a minute ago, and he said that Pickens is pretty confidently ruled out, if not very doubtful for this Eagles game. So, okay. And he also did say that the MRI did reveal a hamstring injury. So I'm really hoping that this isn't long-term because as much as you said that it is nice to not have that drama for a week, I mean, you cannot deny the fact that George Pickens is a top 10 wide receiver in the National Football League. He's top 10 in receiving yards. He's one of the best in terms of average yards per play. I mean, he is an X factor, and to not have him against a Eagles team that is pretty much one of the most complete teams, I feel like, roster-wise in the NFL, it is a little bit scary. But like you said, I think that just the way that the offense worked this week, and we got the benefit of seeing guys like Scotty Miller with 3 catches and 30-some yards, to know that they can step up in a way like that, albeit, yes, against a shaky Browns defense, it is nice to know that we have that in the tank.
Oh, absolutely, and I totally agree with George Pickens and the fact that he is amazing and he's a stud. And so, yes, I would love to have him next week and just playoffs and everything. We're going to need him, but I did like that we were able to throw it to other people like you said, Scotty Miller and, Mike Williams. One of his catches did get called back. They were literally the same play. And so, it was unfortunate that it was called back, but I think that those just gave me confidence. Keep giving the ball his way. And I want to give a huge shout out to Arthur Smith these past 2 weeks because the offense has looked insane. And one play in particular, which I loved, was our last touchdown that we scored. We were in the red zone. It was a fake. It was a read option. And Russ kept it. And so I was like, oh, he's going to run. And then it's like, oh, my goodness. There's Connor Hayward at the line of scrimmage. He could throw it to him. And then he throws it down the field. And you're like, oh, what? Van Jefferson is wide open. And, it was like a 4-option. It was like a 4-option play, and it's like, wow, like when's the last time you've seen a play that has that much design and that much development from the Pittsburgh Steelers? And it was the first time in a long time I've seen a play from the Steelers on offense, and I was like, wow, I am impressed. Like, that was impressive. And so that's just super encouraging, and I hope that Arthur Smith just keeps kind of letting it loose and like getting out all his gadgets and his designs, because if he's got more stuff like that, which I think he does, and he has shown, like, our offense is going to be extremely hard to stop.
And even if George Pickens is out, I think this allows for some creativity with Arthur Smith this week, because we're doing this on a Tuesday, and the fact that Mike Tomlin is already saying that Pickens is probably not going to be available for this Sunday's game, it probably means that now Arthur Smith can kind of dig into the bag a little bit with guys like Ben Skoranek, Scotty Miller, Calvin Austin, Mike Williams, heck, even thinking about getting Connor Hayward back involved in the game, because he hasn't really been involved in the passing game in several weeks. And it does allow, I think, for an opportunity to kind of spread the love a little bit. Russ only completed 15 passes this last week, but I don't think anybody had more than 3 receptions. So he was finding a lot of different guys, a lot of different pass catchers, and also involving Jaylen Warren in the passing attack as well. That was really nice. I do have one grievance with George Pickens, even though he didn't have much of a reason to, I guess, elicit any grievances this week. I missed the fantasy football playoffs for the first time in my entire life this season, because George Pickens was ruled out literally like 2 hours before the game. And then also Breece Hall, who's my RB1, also just decided, no, I'm not going to play this week. So I lost by 15 points in a week that I only had to score like 96, and I'm really upset about it. So I have a grievance against George Pickens, and I have a grievance against Breece Hall. And then for whatever reason, the Minnesota Vikings decided to cut their kicker this week, and I didn't realize that until Sunday morning. So I'm really upset. And it's not the Dynasty League that we were both in. I actually played some spoiler in that, beating some good teams down the stretch. Did I? I did beat you. That's right. Yeah, I totally forgot to talk trash into that. But yes, I did beat you down the stretch, but I think you're fine. What seed are you?
I'm the 4th seed, so I'm still in. But I was 8-2, then hit a 3-game losing streak, and you were like the bottom. You were like my rock bottom. I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to win another game? But maybe this missing the playoffs here, speaking of our league, could be a little Steelers revenge from you dropped Justin Fields, and I think it was within a minute I went and picked him up like immediately.
Yeah, that was so Bush League, because I was not aware of the rules about how we have 3 taxi squad guys. That was not explained clearly to me. So I've been working with 3 less roster spots all year, and if I would have known that, then I would have had Luke McCaffrey, who's had like 2 catches all season on that taxi squad, and I would have been able to keep Justin Fields for whatever reason, whether he ends up in Pittsburgh later down the road or if he does go to another team next year. But you literally, that made me so mad to see that notification, because I dropped him because I didn't have any other IR spots available, and with our stupid league, you have to have your IR spots have to be cleared for you to make any moves at all within your roster. So I was put behind the 8 ball there, and then for you to scoop him up, that just made me mad. And then I just ended up taking Will Levis, who you dropped to pick up Fields.
For him.
Yes, that made me so mad. I'm not forgiving you for that. And if Justin Fields turns out to be good, whether that's with the Steelers or not, then I'm going to be really upset about that.
Well, I'm still over here getting so frustrated that you offered me Caleb Williams or Josh Allen with Cortland Sutton for like a pick and Brian Robinson. I didn't take it. And
yes.
I just can't believe it.
You were an absolute idiot for that, and I am going to stand by this. If you continued, I'm not just talking to you, I'm talking to everybody out there. If you continue to undervalue Josh Allen in fantasy football, you are a freaking idiot. Freaking idiot. He put up 62 points in our league this last week. That's going to win you any single week. I had Ray Davis as my RB1 last week, and I still beat one of the top teams in the league. I am so sick of people undervaluing Josh Allen.
Well, I do have Josh Allen in one of my other leagues, and I'm the top seed in that, so I'll take that.
Fair enough. Are you going to win? Are you okay? So you said you're the top seed. Okay, you better win. I'm hoping you win.
I hope I do, but the owner, who's the second seed, is going crazy right now and getting all the bottom seeds' best players and like trading for them. And so like I'm trying to do the same thing, but it's wild right now.
So you guys like don't have a trade deadline at all?
He closed it and then opened it, and then now it's just chaos.
That's ridiculous. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing. There's a little fantasy football rant for you. We haven't had one of those in a while.
That was we just kept going there.
Yeah, I love it. Well, let me talk a couple more things about this Browns game, and then we can move on to the Eagles.
Okay.
What do you think about Myles Garrett shushing the crowd after a sack on like 3rd and 17, down 13 points with like 2 minutes left?
I think that he just wanted a reaction, and I think I'm going to be honest. I don't like him at all. I've never liked him, especially after the Mason Rudolph thing. It's, he's a Brown. I don't like the way he acts. I don't like that he stole Defensive Player of the Year last year from TJ Watt. And so, yeah, him doing that, I'm like, oh, like, good job. Congrats. You're down 13. You have 3 wins. You're horrible. You're garbage. You're never going to win a Super Bowl. Go home. Like, that was just like, that's my rant on Myles Garrett. I strongly despise him. And, so yeah, I like saw that and I was like, okay, like it doesn't really hold any weight to me because we're whooping you right now.
Now, my follow-up question to that is, like, I think I have my understanding of the situation, but from your perspective, do you think people at large like see him as a better player than TJ Watt? Like, just unbiased, like what do you gather from that, I guess?
I think that TJ Watt continues to be extremely underrated. I think this year, for some warrant, but now after one game, he's kind of launched himself back up into one of the top defensive players. But however, I mean, just last year was egregious at what happened. And so I would say yes. Like, I think that Browns fans for sure, I know that my friends that are neither Brown nor Steelers fans will always talk about Myles Garrett. I think the thing that keeps it close is that ever since COVID, Myles Garrett has had a very low snap count and has always, like, it was specifically that year and the year after, but I think it still is, like, in effect a little bit. But he doesn't have as many snaps, I believe, as TJ Watt, and I think that kind of keeps it, like, a little balanced. But I do think that there is bias towards I don't know if it's bias, but I think people just think that he's better than TJ Watt.
Interesting. It seems like Watt is now back into the firm grasp of being the defensive player of the year, at least in terms of like betting odds and just, perspective from analysts and stuff like that, which is good. And I think that's how it should be. What's Watt's importance level coming into this last stretch of the season? Like, is his exceptional play like the X factor in these last 4 games? I'm not even just talking about this Eagles game. I'm saying for the rest of this season. How important is he even now that we have Alex Highsmith back? How important is it that Watt continues to play well?
I would say extremely. I mean, you look at what happens, like we see what happens these past 2 weeks when Watt actually shows up and like plays. It's like, even though the Bengals game was 1 score, we handled that game. We definitely handled this Browns game. I think that it is critical that like we see at least one, like, there's TJ Watt play, and we see him make a game-wrecking play. I think it's vital. I think he is vitally needed for the team. And here's what I'm going to say also about this. It doesn't even necessarily need to be like a crazy splash play. Like, I think, Highsmith got a sack right off the bat and was getting tons of pressure. I think that is Watt making a vital play. Like, they're doubling him and forgetting about Highsmith, and it's like he needs to continue to be that game wrecker that allows Highsmith and, like, Hayward to go and get this guy. So I would say, yeah, he's the, I would say, like, centerfold of this defense.
Yeah. And you said something about Cam Hayward, and he just continues. It seems like every week he is just making incredible plays. He had 2 sacks this last week. He continues to have a lot of pass deflections. He's been great in the running game. Like, is this the best year that he's had ever? Is that crazy to say?
I mean, it's definitely, like, the best year he's had in a long time. I'd have to go back and look at the stats. I don't really remember. We were younger when he, like, it first started, but it could be. And honestly, like, the more and more he plays, the more happy I am about getting his jersey. Like, his jersey, probably in the past, like, 4 years, is the best jersey I've gotten. One, he's an Ohio State guy, and I'm an Ohio State fan. And then he's been with us for so long, and he's probably going to stay with us his whole career. And he's, like, having like a midlife prime right now, and, like, it's just awesome.
Like, he takes midlife crisis and says, no, I'm just going to go the other way. That's
exactly,
funny.
Yeah.
All right. Let's start to move into this Eagles week. And I have a stat for you that I don't know if you are aware of this. I'm sure that you knew this to some degree, but it just continues to baffle me. The Pittsburgh Steelers have not won a game in Philadelphia since 1965.
It's so funny that you mentioned that. I was actually going to bring that up because I knew for a fact that in the 2000s we hadn't beat them at Philadelphia. And so I was going to bring that up, but I had no idea it went all the way back to the 60s.
Yes.
So, man, I mean, that's just horrible. And I don't understand what it is, but they have our number when we go there. And it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, both teams very different than usual. And, I mean, I guess the Eagles, they've kind of had this look since about 2020. So they're, kind of in their mode. But we're very different than we have been. I hope and do believe that statistic won't be a big factor in this. I think that this is going to be different than all the other years prior. Because, like, whether they're a different team or not, we're such a different team. I think that, like, it's got to be a different outcome, right?
I would hope so, and the big problem with me is perhaps the lack of George Pickens this week, because as much as we are a different team, I mean, to lose your best wide receiver, to lose a top 10 wide receiver, that just, it makes me a little bit worried about this game. And I have an opinion on this game, and I'll get your thoughts on that in a minute, but I want to indulge you in a game. I want to see what you think about the Eagles roster, because I have a narrative that I want to create about the Eagles roster. So what I want to do, I'm going to say a player, and then I want you to tell me if he is a top 10, top 5, top 1, top 15, whatever, at that position in the league. So I'm going to go through this, and I want to get your opinions on this. So okay. I'm going to start with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is a top what quarterback?
I'd say 15.
Top 15, okay. Saquon Barkley, top what running back?
Top 1.
1. So he has passed Derrick Henry, you think?
This year, yes, I do.
Okay. A.J. Brown, top what wide receiver?
Even though he hasn't had the greatest year, I'd say 10.
Okay. Devontae Smith, top what wide receiver?
I'd say top 20, maybe 15.
Okay. So in some range, you say they have 2 top 15 wide receivers-ish.
Yeah.
Okay. Dallas Goedert, top what tight end?
I mean, he's got to be a top 10, right? Maybe even I would say top 10.
Yeah, this is your opinion. Top what offensive line?
They're top 5.
I mean, okay, that's fair. All right, here's my thoughts on these. Jalen Hurts, I think, is a top 10 quarterback. Saquon, top 2. I don't know if he's better than Derrick Henry, but I think you could make the argument that you said for being top 1. A.J. Brown, I say he's a top 10 wide receiver. Devontae Smith, top 20 wide receiver. Dallas Goedert, I think he's probably like a top 7, 8 tight end. I don't think he's quite as low as 10, maybe not quite as high as 5. but I think he's definitely in that range. And then offensive line, I can't imagine that there's a much better offensive line in football, especially with the scheme that they have displayed over the last several years. They might be just straight up one, but I'll say like top 2 or top 3 offensive line. So, with that, we just went through the entirety of the Eagles offense. Now I want you to tell me, how many more points do you think the Eagles have scored than the Steelers this year?
I can't be much. I don't think it can be that much because I don't really think they've had a game where they've really I can't remember a game where they blew someone out. And I know they've scored 30 maybe a couple times. I'd say if I had to guess, I'd say it'd be very similar.
Okay, well, give me a number. How many more points have they scored than the Steelers?
I'm going to say maybe 10 or it's even, honestly.
Okay. They have scored 19 more points than the Steelers this season.
Okay.
Now, how many points has their defense let up in comparison to the Steelers?
Okay. I'm going to say they've given up maybe 24, 27 more points.
They've given up 4 less points than the Steelers this season.
Okay.
Now, here's the big kicker question. What is the difference in strength of victory between the Eagles and the Steelers this season?
Man, it's tight. We've played so many similar teams because we play their division. I think that we have a slightly stronger strength of opponent.
You are correct in that it is .002 more than the Eagles.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, here's where I'm going to create this narrative. The national media would make you think that the Eagles are a top team in the NFC and perhaps a top team in football. There are a lot of people, I believe, that think the Eagles are Super Bowl bound once again. When was the last time? What was it, 2022? That was the first Chiefs Super Bowl?
Yeah.
So there are people thinking that the Eagles are going back to the Super Bowl this year. Now, here's the difference. We just read through the entirety of the Eagles offense. How is it that a team that has a top category in every single position group, some of which that are top 5, even as far as top 1 or 2, how the heck are they just barely outscoring the Steelers, who have George Pickens as their wide receiver 1, and then just this amalgamation of who knows what the heck is our wide receiver 2, who have a running back tandem that, yes, is very good, but is probably just hovering around that top 10 range, a 30-some-year-old Russell Wilson, a young, perhaps arguably underutilized tight end, and an offensive line that is probably not the best ever. How is it that they are just barely outscoring the Steelers this year? Answer that question for me, because I want to know what you think.
Well, one answer, something that I've been seeing recently, is their pass attack. I know that their pass attack has gotten under a lot of heat this year because it just has not been really that good. Dan Orlovsky called it elementary this week. I think that they're just the statistics are just showing how they don't perform well in the pass. So I think that could be holding them back. And I haven't watched a lot of Eagles football, but I honestly think from what I've seen, this is a offense that runs through Saquon Barkley. And if Saquon Barkley is not, playing the MVP caliber performance that he's giving, they're not going to win. Almost so many games we were talking about are close, and then Saquon Barkley makes a big play. Or even the Rams game, I think was close for a little, and then Saquon Barkley had 265 yards. So I think that the reason why is just because maybe they're not even utilizing their other top tools. It's just we have Saquon Barkley, give him the ball. And if they don't give him the ball, then they just don't know where to go other than that. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you're absolutely right in that they're relying on Saquon a ton because they're giving him a lot of touches per game. He honestly kind of reminds me of Ashton Genty with Boise State this season. Like, obvious Heisman candidate. They're giving him the ball all the time. And the other thing about Saquon is he's lethal in the passing game as well. He's a check down option for Jalen Hurts, and that just adds another wrinkle to his game. But I don't think that there's been maybe more than 3 games this season that he doesn't have 100 rushing yards, which, when you look at that number, like, that's staggering. To know that he's pretty much a lock to have 100 rushing yards a game, that's ridiculous. But it really just confuses me to see them play a one-score game against the Carolina Panthers, and they almost lost that game. If Xavier Legette catches a ball in the end zone, then the Panthers probably win that game. It doesn't seem like the Eagles win convincingly this year. Yes, they're beating good teams. They beat the Ravens a couple of weeks ago by a score or two. They're beating their divisional opponents. They beat the Commanders pretty not convincingly, but like you said, it was a Saquon Barkley run at the end of the game that put it away. They're not beating bad teams by a lot either. So I'm a little confused as to why they're put on a pedestal this season. It seems like in the NFC, it's the Lions and the Eagles, and I think people are saying the Eagles are up there in terms of teams that can knock off the Lions. But then you think of the Steelers, who are a top 3 team statistically in the AFC, and it just doesn't seem like we're getting the light of day in terms of coverage and stuff like that. So this week's matchup is really intriguing to me. I don't really know what this game is going to look like. What do you think it's going to turn out like?
Well, and I could honestly agree with you, because I could see it going multiple ways. One, their pass game's horrible, and they've obviously spoken about how they want to work on that. So I am incredibly nervous that for some reason their pass game clicks against us, which I'm worried about. But that's more of just I feel like that tends to happen to us. The Ravens had a horrible secondary, and then they had a great game against us when we played them. But, that's just the Ravens Steelers. I think what I'm most concerned about, like I was saying with how I saw the Browns running the ball, is the run game and Saquon Barkley. I think I'm worried he could have a huge day. And again, I think that it's just the key. Make Jalen Hurts throw the football. You saw, even when they beat the Packers week 1. They won, but Jalen Hurts had so many turnovers. And make them rely on Hurts, because Hurts fumbles. Hurts throws picks. Saquon Barkley does not. Saquon Barkley is solid. So I honestly would, in the coaching rooms and stuff, I would obviously keep doing what you're doing with the secondary, but I'd be let's lock in. And if they're what we just talked about, if the Eagles scheme is Saquon Barkley until it doesn't work, it's okay, then our scheme should be shut down Saquon Barkley, period. And then we make them, make mistakes. And so I think that that'll be the key. And I think that I think it's going to be, I think it'll be a high scoring affair. I am nervous, but I do think it'll be high scoring. And I think that Saquon Barkley, like he has been for all the Eagles games, for the most part, will be the key to this game.
Okay, I have one question for you, and I'm going to kind of segue that into my second narrative that I want to create this episode. How important is it that we win this week? And I'll just leave it at that, and I'll let you answer.
I think honestly, these next 3 games, all of them are crucial. I think it's you have to go. These next 3 games, the last game against the Bengals, we'll see depending on how these games go. But these next 3 games, you have to treat them as playoff games. These literally are playoff games, because all these 3 teams, the Ravens maybe, but 2 of them for sure, playoff teams. And the Ravens are a playoff team. We'll just see if they get into it or not. But I think it's crucial. I think it's you can't be all right, well, let's try and you can't look at the schedule and be well, this game is NFC. Let's focus more on the AFC. It's no, you have to win this week. If you want to hang on to your seed, that's where we're at right now with the Bills and the Chiefs, and how this AFC is turning out to be. It's we can't afford losses in games that we can win. And I think that all of these games coming up are ones that we can win, even though they're tough. And I want us to be able to play well and win against these playoff teams. And I think we can. And yeah, I'd say we got to win. Like, I think that, I don't want us to go to sleep on this week because, I think we need to. I think it's vital.
Okay, and then I guess I'm going to give you a follow-up question with this. It's very realistic that the Steelers could lose any one, if not all, of these last 4 weeks. So, with that being said, if you could only win one more game this season, who would you pick them to win against? The Eagles, the Ravens, the Chiefs, or the Bengals? If they can only win one of those games in a vacuum, who would you pick to win?
I'd pick the Ravens because it would secure us the division.
Okay, now here's where the narrative that I'm going to create comes in, because I agree with you. I think the Ravens game is the one that is most vital to win. It doesn't seem like Mike Tomlin is going to throw this week. It seems like he is very intent, regardless of the absence of George Pickens, that they are going to throw everything that they can at the Eagles this week. However, do you think that's a ploy? Do you think that's just saying, okay, we're going to throw everything we can at this week to get the Eagles on their heels and making sure that they are also prepped for this week? Or do you think that is kind of smoke and mirrors? We're going to be prepping for the Ravens in 2 weeks because that's the game that means the most. And then subsequently, we can go after that Chiefs game, and I think that would be just as much of a quality win than it would be if we were to beat the Eagles this week. What do you think about that?
I do believe him. I think that maybe they are planning a little bit for Baltimore, but the way Mike Tomlin works, I honestly don't think that he is, and I think that he's focused on this week, and I think that honestly, he probably has no reason to want to spend an extra week because, however he coaches against the Ravens, it works almost every time. And so I honestly don't think, I think he's not going to, not take it seriously, but I think he's confident about the Ravens, even if it's in Baltimore. And so I do think his statement's true. And kind of talking about the Chiefs, too, this is a game, the Chiefs, that I've been saying all year. I'm like, oh, we're going to win. However, I wouldn't even be that upset if we lost because, and I was going to say this when I give my score prediction for the Eagles, is when a team loses, especially if we beat the Chiefs and then we play them in the playoffs, they'll double down on when they play us and then try and correct every little thing versus if a team barely skates by, it's like, all right, what we did was right. Let's keep moving forward. And so I think it's a win. I think it's almost a win-win if we can take care of business in these other games.
That's a good breakdown. I didn't really think about that kind of perspective on it, but I think that's very valuable. Why don't you go ahead and start with your score prediction? I'm going to come in after you. I already know what I'm going to say, so don't think I'm going to change things up based on what you were going to say, because I'm still a game behind you.
Okay. So here's my deciding factor this week. I was obviously watching the Steelers game, and I have an Eagles fan who I'm a friend with, so we were kind of keeping up with that. Once the Steelers game ended, we switched to the Eagles, and this was my mindset, and this is what I believed. I was like, all right, if the Eagles lose this game, we're going to lose. If the Eagles win this game, we're going to win. Just for the point that I mentioned against the Chiefs, that if the Eagles lose this game, they have double the reason to say, okay, these things are actually wrong. The passing game actually isn't doing well. Let's really lock in here and fix it versus oh, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking about the Panthers last week, right?
Yes, the Panthers.
Okay.
And they're like, oh, let's really, really fix this. Versus they're saying to the media, yes, we're going to fix this. Yes, we're going to do that. But they're still in the mindset of, well, hey, we won. We can win, And so I think they're not as driven to fix these things because, hey, they're still winning. So with that in mind, I'm going to say I do think that we're going to contain Saquon Barkley a little bit. I am confident, obviously the Ravens games are just different, but Derrick Henry did basically nothing besides one run. And I think that we can be up to the challenge if, we take care of business. And I think it'll be a close one though. And I think we're going to win 34-31.
Wow. High scoring game.
I do think it's going to get up there. I think that, but I mean, like you said, the talent on the Eagles offense, I just can't imagine it not doing nothing. And then I think the way our offense has been playing, I think that it's bound to get up there.
Interesting. I see this as a defensive slog, but not in a way that really favors the Steelers. I think that this Eagles defense is perhaps somehow underrated. I think their linebackers are incredible. They have some really hard-hitting guys, and we also do. I'm thinking about guys like Elandon Roberts, who blew up plays this week. And
oh my goodness, that was absurd.
Yes, it was. And the fact that he gets in the backfield on plays like that, seemingly weekly, is just incredible. And again, we've talked about Patrick Queen. He continues to rise. And even Peyton Wilson he's just flying all over the football field. Now, I think that this week is won and lost at the second level for both teams. I think the secondary for both teams is a little spotty at times. I think that the Eagles secondary is good, but maybe slightly overrated. But I think that middle level for the Steelers and the Eagles is where this game is going to be determined this week. I have a feeling that the Steelers are going to lose this one, and I don't think it's really going to be close. I think it's going to be close at the beginning of the game, but like you rightly identified, Saquon Barkley has a finishing aspect of him, and I think he does that type of thing, especially with how our run defense seems to give up some big runs at times. I think that might happen later in the game, and I think it wears us down, and I think it gets to the point where the Eagles will score at the end and kind of put us away. So I'm going to say, and again, I didn't change my prediction based on what you said. The fact that you said win, I was coming into this game thinking that it's going to be a 27-10 Eagles win.
Wow. Okay, interesting. Very different opinions. It'll be interesting to see how it works out. It'll be also, weather will for sure play a factor. Who knows what it's going to be like in Philly, but that's interesting.
Yeah. So in one way or another, one game will be picked up at some point this week. So there's a possibility that I could be back and tied with you. And honestly, the reason that I say a loss is because I look at that number, and again, you said that I don't think that they're really thinking about that number, but just the fact that they haven't won a game in Philly since 1965 is just mind-boggling to me. And it honestly reminds me a little bit about the Browns' relationship with the Steelers in Pittsburgh, because the Browns can't win in Pittsburgh aside from the one wildcard game several years ago. That is it. And the Browns can't win in Pittsburgh no matter what happens. So that's kind of the number that I'm looking at coming into this game. And all that to say, even if they lose this game, it would not make matters a concern for me, because I think that they would come right back, and I think that they would beat Baltimore the next week, even if they do lose this week. So with a win this week, we could lock up our playoff spots, because we have not done that yet. But I still don't see it necessarily as a win this week.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I agree that statistic is absurd and a little frightening, but I'm hopeful that we can break the curve. And I think that this team, I don't know. It's hard, and I think that the Eagles have a lot of cracks, and I think that we will be able to expose them this week.
Okay, so two very different score predictions. David predicting a Steelers tight win, and me predicting a Steelers big loss. In Philly this week, the battle for the Keystone States. It's going to be a big one. It's going to be a nasty one. The Eagles always seem to become prepared for this game, and the Steelers do as well, but it definitely seems like, at least in recent past, even in games in Pittsburgh, that Philly finds a way in these games. So if they do win this game, that's even more reason to be very hopeful for this season, which I think is another point that I was going to make. It's like, if they find a way to win in Philly in a hostile environment against a team that's won 9 games in a row and just doesn't seem to show any signs of stopping, then I might be willing to start booking my Super Bowl tickets.
Yeah, I agree with that. all points are going against us here this week. So if we can win it, confidence is sky high.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're going to hope for a Here We Go Steelers win. Zane and David on the Boardman Black and Gold podcast, which is sponsored by Zecca Enterprises, crafting furniture solutions in northwestern Pennsylvania. Call 910-777-3871 to learn more. Big week for the Steelers. Again, the Keystone State battle. Who comes out on top, the Steelers or the Eagles? We will have an Eagles Outside Perspective episode later this week with one of our good buddies, and we have a lot of mutual friends that are Eagles fans, so this might be one of the most contentious weeks in this podcast's memory, I think.
Oh, without a doubt. I'm very excited to see this episode.
Yes, so if you are listening to the sound of our voice now, be sure to check out our Outside Perspective later this week. And again, hopefully we'll see you after a Here We Go Steelers win. Zane and David on the Boardman Black and Gold podcast. We'll be back next week to break things down. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.